This conference will now be recorded.
This is Special Olympics Sports Director Scott Held. The date today, as you can hopefully see in the bottom corner of the screen, is March 3rd, 2021. Today we are going to be doing an instructional and a walkthrough on how to fill out your registration and final scores form for State Summer Games 2021. Now, right off the bat, there are 4 different tabs on this document that you may need to access. At any one point, depending on the events your team is participating in, you may have to fill out just a portion of these forms, or you may have to fill out all of them. Now, the 4 forms at the bottom I'm talking about, 4 different pages, is page 1. Hopefully you can see my cursor moving here. Page 1, team info and volunteers. Page 2, the scores form. Page 3, golf supplemental info. And page 4, compete from home. To start today on the number 1 page that every single team has to fill out, regardless of the events that you're competing in. This is the State Summer Games 2021 registration and final scores form, or team info and volunteers form. First thing you want to do, and again, make sure you fill out all this information. If you do not, it will be returned to you in order for it to be continued, or in order for it to be filled out and then resubmitted. So delegation, just as in this example, we're going to put in Helena Dragons. LPC name, John Smith. LPC phone number. Now again, the phone number and email, which are the next 2 boxes, are so we can contact you if we have questions on the form, questions about your team, or just for any miscellaneous reason in regards to State Summer Games. So I'll put in a random number. LPC email, so an email that is good to contact you at, and make sure the phone number is also a good contact. LPC mailing address. Now there are a few things that are still up in the air at this point for State Summer Games, including how we will distribute awards, how we may distribute other items such as goodie bags or thermometers or other things that your team may need. So make sure to list your mailing address in here. We will cross-check this with our games management system we have on file, just to make sure before we send you anything. But yes, make sure to list a good mailing address that you have access to and will not reject the mail that we may send. All right. The next box is to take note of. As we move through this document, these dates will be applicable. Due date, final 3rd, and final scores to Scott Held at sheld@somt.org. Make sure to submit all paperwork, so that's athlete, volunteer paperwork, coach paperwork, all paperwork, and the COVID tracking forms that you should be filling out before every practice. Take a look at the games information packet that was sent out to LPCs and is available on the State Summer Games page at somt.org to reference that, to make sure that you are filling those out before every practice. But you will submit those to Lisa Romig at lromig@somt.org. Okay, now the last piece of this page that you will need to fill out before moving on to the next page is the volunteer section. Here you will list the first and last name and role of every volunteer that will be assisting with the team. And there are some examples in that statement. This is due at the registration date, and it is also due at the final scores date, but the first draft is due at the registration date, so make sure this is filled out by April 12th. Here we'll just list a couple of random names. And if you have more volunteers, you would just continue to fill out these boxes. But for the sake of this this example, we're just going to go ahead and keep it at 2 volunteers, so a volunteer and a coach. And we're going to move on to the scores form. Now the scores form, this is for those teams that are going to be getting together at practice with their teams and actually gathering together. So if you're doing only compete from home, you're going to want to go ahead and just ignore this section of the video until we get to the compete from home close to the end of the video. But for those teams that are getting together in practice with their teams, these are the instructions for filling out this registration form. We're going to go through these notes one at a time because they are all important, so make sure you observe these. First thing, if entered text is more than the box can contain, do not reformat this document. When the form is submitted, we will make the adjustments to read it. So as an example, down here, even though we have wrapped text selected, if for some reason you have an incompatible form of Excel or any other spreadsheet software, and your names bleed off the edge of the document or at the edge of the box, that's okay. We will make the adjustment. We want to make sure that our formatting that we utilize to make things efficient at the state office stays intact, and we will make the adjustments if we need to. Okay, note number 1. Use this form to list athletes, unified partners, and the scores for every sport or event they're participating in. If more blocks are needed, feel free to add more cells. So that's pretty self-explicable. There's about 70 spots for registrations here, or for entering athlete names, scores, and events on here on this form. If you need more, just go ahead and copy and paste at the bottom of the document. Note 2, record all timed events in minutes and seconds. Record all distance events in meters and centimeters. Now, there will be some examples. Note 3, when listing timed scores, round to the nearest second. So do not round to the nearest tenth or the nearest hundredth of a second. When it comes down to divisioning and final scores, this often makes no difference whatsoever. So the nearest second is going to be plenty sufficient for going ahead and recording those scores. So we're going to list all times in decimal minutes and seconds. For example, a 1 minute and 3 second event, put 1.03. So the 1 would serve as the minute, and for 3 seconds, you put 0.03 because it is under 10. For a 12-second event, put 0.12. Or let's say, as an example, it was a 1 minute and 12-second event. You would put 1.12. So the 2 places after the decimal will go up to 60, or I guess up to 59. And once it reaches 60, I will automatically make a calculation to translate that to minutes. For a 10-minute and 23-second event, put 10.23. Note 4, when listing distance scores, list in meters and centimeters. Round scores to the nearest centimeter. For example, for a 5 meter and 10 centimeter throw, put 5.10. If it was a 5 meter and 11 centimeter throw, you'd put 5.11, so on and so forth, until you reach the next meter. If you have questions on any of this, please reach out to Scott Held at the state office. He will go through it with you and make sure that we get everything handled. Note 5, make sure to list the 2 best individual scores for each event, exception in note 6. Now, for every event except the exceptions we're about to hit, you will be entering the 2 best individual scores an athlete or a unified partner achieves through the course of the practice season. Note 6, for athletics relays and levels 3 and 4 in soccer, list the doubles/teams best 2 scores. So you're going to just have them as they work together. You will take their team or their doubles best score, and those will be the scores you submit instead of individual scores. Note 7, when listing the best scores, list the 2 best scores the competitor has achieved up to the due date for the entire season. Scores may improve from registration date to the final scores date, but should not decline. So basically, we have, if you look down here a little bit lower without getting too far ahead of ourselves, we have the orange section, which is due at the registration date, which is that April 12th date. And then the green section, which is due on May 3rd. Now, what you're going to do is list the 2 best scores that the athlete or unified partner or the team, depending on the event, has achieved for the entire season up to that due date. You shouldn't list any scores that were worse than the 2 best scores in the registration date. You shouldn't list anything worse in the green section. It should only get better or it should stay the same. Note 8, for golf and soccer, when listing the event, just list the level that the athlete is competing in. Examples being level 1, level 2, etc. And then make sure to list their scores as well. Note 9, for bocce, when listing the event, list the event the athlete is participating in the following format: singles, doubles, unified doubles. Note 10, for athletics and cycling, list the exact event name as listed in the game's information packet. So again, the reason for that is because in an event like cycling or a sport like cycling, we have 3 versions of every event essentially. So using the 500-meter race as an example, there's a 500-meter bicycle race, a 500-meter tricycle race, and a 500-meter unified race. So we want to make sure that we're listing bicycle, tricycle, or unified, because if you don't, I won't know what event you want to enter your athlete in or unified partner in, and you will be contacted for follow-up information. So make sure to list it exactly as it's listed in the game's info packet. Note 11, see the golf supplemental info tab, which is down here, for additional info needed for registration for teams participating in golf. If needed info is not completed, the registration will not be accepted. All right, now moving on to the next section, we have 3 examples here to go through. So I'll do a little zoom in here. Hopefully we can see all this the best. All right, so as you can see here, we have Bruce Wade and Diana Prince, who are athletes, and Clark Kent, who is a unified partner. Now, for these games, your athlete is limited to 3 events, but it doesn't matter the amount of sports that your athlete competes in. So your athlete can compete, in 2 events from one sport and 1 from another, 3 events from one sport, and it's not required that they do 3 events, but they can do up to 3 events. So as an example here, Bruce Wayne is doing 3 different sports with 3 different events, because obviously it's 3 different sports. But Diana Prince is doing 2 different sports. She's got golf listed down here, but she's also doing 2 from cycling. So you would just list cycling as sport number 1 and sport number 2. Okay, so for the events, as you can see here, as mentioned above in the instructions, the exact event is listed out for athletics. So the 1,500-meter run. For soccer, level 3 is listed. For bocce, singles is listed. And you can go ahead and take a look at Diana's and Clark's to see that that's the exact same way. Now, the next couple boxes refer if this athlete is participating in teams or doubles. So the next box would be as if you want to assign a team name to your doubles or team or unified doubles groupings. So as you can see as an example here, Bruce is paired with Clark Kent for level 3 soccer, which is unified soccer. And they both have their team name here listed as the Caped Crusaders. Now, if you don't want to list a team name will be assigned to them. So as an example, if you remember from earlier in the video, we said this team's name was the Helena Dragons. We would call them Helena Dragons 1, just as an example. It helps keep things organized when it comes time for divisioning and final scores. The next box over, you would list your teammate name. So Bruce is competing with Clark Kent, and down below, Clark Kent is competing with Bruce. That keeps things straightforward for us when we go ahead and enter things and try to division and run scores for your teams. The next box over, you would list the best score number 1 and best score number 2 that your athlete or unified partner achieved up to the registration date due date. As you can see, these are added in. Now, one thing to note from these is these boxes, registration score and final score boxes, will auto total what you type in here so long as you have a compatible version of Excel. So we'll go ahead and type this, and we'll just an example. I'll move this from 10.1 to 10.3. Now go ahead and watch that registration score box. You see the way that auto totals then? Over here, we'll do the same thing. And you can see the way that it switches around. Okay, now one thing again to keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, here in the green box, this will be the 2 best scores that the athlete has achieved through the entire season up to the final scores due date. So you'll see here Bruce improved 1 score, but did not improve the second score. So the best score from the registration due date is actually the second best score from the final scores date. So again, in the green box, their scores should never get worse. They should only get better or stay the same. And you go ahead and do that for every single section. Okay. So again, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to Scott Held at Special Olympics, and I'll go ahead and walk through this and make sure we can get it handled and answered. All right, next section. This is if you have golfers that participate in course play events, so levels 2 through 5. Now, if you have golfers that participate in levels 0 and 1, which are our skills level, you won't need to use this form. This is only for those teams that have athletes or unified partners participating in levels 2 through 5 course play golf. Now, what the goal is for this form is to get a gauge on your course and your course layout. In order to keep things fair from course to course, so for example, an athlete who practices primarily in a par 5 course is on the same and has an equal playing field as an athlete who may participate on a golf course that is primarily par 3s or par 4s, is we have a formula that we will be running a calculation on. You can go ahead and go to the game's information packet to find that formula, and this will help us make things level and equitable for those folks that are participating in golf course play. So what we're going to do here, right at the top, list all required information below. If there's missing information, you will be contacted. All supplemental information is due at registration due date, so that's that April 12th date, guys. All hole lengths should be measured from the tee closest to the hole. The closest tee should always be played for practice and competition. So that's straightforward. You should always have your athletes playing off the closest tee. And then we do need the measurements. As you see down here, hole length in yards. We do need the measurements from that tee box to the green, as the course has them measured out for you. You should be able to just ask the course or get a scorecard, and that will show you the distances from each tee. So what we're going to list here is course name. So just as an example, we'll go Helena Valley Links, Course City. Just go ahead and type in Helena. And then the next question is, what are the primary holes for your 9-hole competitors practice on? So again, this is, if you only have an 18-hole competitor, this won't matter, but that's not very common. So if you have 9-hole competitors, please let me know if it's the front 9 or the back 9. That way I can run the calculation correctly. So as an example, we would just type in holes 1 through 9. Are the correct holes that your athletes practice on the most frequently. Now up here where it says primary course utilized, I should mention this. If you have multiple courses you practice on, list the course in here that you guys practice on the most. Okay, so next thing we would do is pretty straightforward. Right off the scorecard, just go ahead and enter in this information. So as an example, and you'll see down here at the bottom, it'll auto total for you. Just do, let's see. Boom, auto total. Then what you'll do next is you'll go and type in your hole length in yards. So just as an example, and again, I don't know if these are correct distances without going ahead and looking at some reference sheets that I have. And you see it auto totals the yardage distance down at the bottom. Now, if you have 18-hole players or you practice on 18 holes at any point, you need to go ahead and enter this in the back for the back 18 holes as well, or the back 9. If you practice on only a 9-hole course, list that somewhere in here. Say only a 9-hole course or something like that, and that'll let us know that you guys aren't missing any information. We won't have to follow up with you guys. All right, last tab that we have to hit here. Now, this is for you folks that have some athletes participating in the compete from home option. Now, first thing at the top is submit the best score each participant has achieved up to the submission deadline. So this is very similar to the scores for compete from practice. We want the best score that your athlete has achieved up to that due date. So note one, unified pairs and teams must all compete in the same category of exercises. Now that is for simplicity of divisioning and to keep things fair. If you are doing a unified pair or team option, you need to make sure that you guys are doing the same exercises. We can't mix and match. Note two, enter the best individual score, even when filling in scores from traditional and unified pairs and teams. Pairs and double scores will be added together by SOMT. So at no point are you entering a team score here. We're only going to enter the best score for that individual. Note three, when listing time scores, list in decimal form hundredths. For example, a 1 minute and 3 second event, put 1.03. For a 10 meter and 23 centimeter throw, put 10.23. This is pretty similar to the scores form, just written a little bit differently due to the way that we're entering scores in. Okay, next section. Blue section is due at the registration date. Blue and orange sections are due at the final scores date. Next thing is input registration scores in the blue section, input final scores in the orange section. So we're going to do our final scores in orange and our registration scores in blue. Okay. Now, next thing we're going to go ahead and enter in here, guys. We have two examples, Barry Allen and Arthur Curry. Both are athletes for these examples, and both are competing in singles category 1, and they're doing doubles category 2. They can mix and match those. So for singles, you would list your exercise category, which is category 1. Now, if you go over here or you look at the game's info packet, the category 1 exercises are right here: 10-yard walk, run, roll, box agility test, ball tap. For setup instructions, do look at the game's info packet. The category 2 exercises are jumping jacks, power punches, curl-ups. Now, these are set up in columns, so up, down, not left, right for this setup. So since it's category 1 singles, we would just leave the teammate names box blank. And as an example, at the registration date, we will have entered the best score that Barry Allen had achieved up to that date. So 12.02, 35.31, and 46. Now you can see here at the final register, or at the final scores date, that Barry did improve on all of his events, which is why the scores are differently. So that's where the final scores would go for category 1. And that's where the registration scores went. Now, as an example, next, event number 2 that the athlete was participating in was category 2, the category 2 exercises, and it was doubles with Arthur Curry. As you can see here, Arthur was also doing doubles with Barry Allen. You would skip through the boxes for category 1, since obviously they didn't do category 1 for doubles, and then you would go over here to category 2 and list the best scores they achieved. So you'd go ahead and enter in jumping jacks, power punches, and curl-ups scores for registration dates. And then for final scores, and for the final scores due date, you would go ahead and enter if they improved at all. Like in this case, Barry did. And down here, Arthur didn't improve in jumping jacks, but did improve in the other 2 categories. So you would go ahead and enter those in. Now, guys, that is the explanation for this entire registration and final scores form. If you have any questions, again, do not hesitate to reach out at any point. Go ahead and give Scott a call at 406-216-5327 or send him an email at shelb@somt.org, and he will get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks, guys, and we look forward to seeing your teams competing with the state summer games.